Capital versus labor. To many, one of the most fundamental questions about how our economic system works. From the early Luddites vandalizing textile factories in England in protest of the early Industrial Revolution, to 20th century union busting, to modern millennials wondering if they're going to be automated out of a job, history is rife with examples of workers and capital staring daggers at each other. Yet, economists overwhelmingly believe it's not capital versus labor, it's capital and labor, together, on the same side, one helping the other. To many, this is almost absurd, but this belief that capital and labor support each other, to use the economist's phrase, are complements, is one of the most oft-embraced principles of the discipline. And as economists are always wont to do, let's turn to a graph. In 1928, Charles Cobb and Paul Douglas published A Theory of Production in the American Economic Review, what was and still is the world's leading outlet for economics research. A century ago, hard economic data was rare, but some estimates had been made about the number of American workers, the amount of American capital, and the amount of American production. It turns out that a simple equation did a remarkably good job of reconciling these three time series. For Cobb and Douglas, that was the quantity of output is proportional to the quantity of labor raised to the power 3/4 times the quantity of capital raised to the power 1/4. You can see in their graph how well the prediction for output from this equation mimicked the real data. This is what we call the Cobb-Douglas production function. This means two things in particular. One, it meant that labor was more important than capital. It's carrying the bigger exponent. Two, it meant that capital improved the position of labor. More capital means that labor in the equation is being multiplied by a bigger number, so each unit of labor should be worth more. And that should mean each unit of capital raises wages for workers. Capital doesn't replace workers, capital makes the workers more valuable. This equation, by virtue of its simplicity, has stuck so much that it remains a mainstay of undergraduate economics education today. Almost 100 years later, almost any student in a macroeconomic theory class at any university will open their textbook to find a Cobb-Douglas production function, and with it the implication that capital and labor are best friends playing on the same team. There's just one catch. When we turn to the data and look at what's happened to that Cobb-Douglas exponent over time, it keeps shrinking. Based on the original data from Cobb and Douglas covering 1899 to 1922, it looked like labor was 3/4 of production. But today, that number has fallen to around 0.6, suggesting that capital has become considerably more important in production, and consequently, the wages that workers earn are lower. Why? Economists don't know. It's hotly debated. Some argue that this decline is just an artifact of measurement errors. Others talk about firm market power or increased globalization or changing technologies or many other explanations that have been proposed in the academic literature. And indeed, one of the things under hot debate today is whether we've had it wrong for a century and capital and labor really aren't the best of friends. But at the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, this single graph made almost 100 years ago, pieced together in 1928, remains the dominant intellectual influence on how the economics profession views capital and labor, working for each other, side by side, hand in hand.